Hi everybody, how are you doing? In today's video for Halloween with a Halloween themed makeup, I'm making for you a magical creature, a magical witch. Let's take a look at it. The first step is to sketch out the idea. In my case, I was completely doing this out of, imagination, and of course, your imagination is never something brand new. You always end up drawing or recreating something that inspired you, even if it's like a combination of things. So you might recognize certain elements along the way. The first thing that I'm sketching out here is a cape. Cape is just such for me, a staple when creating a witch, an evil character, even superheroes, right? And I wanted it to be like a bit dark and to have movement. That's where you see those wavy bits towards the bottom. I find that the more movement you're able to incorporate in your static image, you end up creating just more enjoyable artwork. Other inspiration that I took here, I wanted to make something kind of skinny and elongated, something that kind of gave maybe a hint of a bone structure. So she ended up becoming a bit skeletony, a bit long, which might have been an influence from like Corpse Bride or Tim Burton's characters. In terms of inspiration, I would really suggest just go with whatever you're passionate about. I love watching fantasy movies and animated things. I have a lot of influence from like those pop culture things. So my illustrations are, when they are not cultural, when they're more fantastical, they're going to be inspired by those things. And they're usually a bit of a mishmash of things that I've seen at some point in my life. I think a few other influences that I had were as well things like Harry Potter with I added like a shirt with the neck and against the cape, a little bow which maybe was a bit more Wednesday Addams, and the shirt, the finish of the shirt, I recently actually purchased a shirt in Italy which has like a beautiful design which it's asymmetric. It's like shorter at the front and longer at the back, and so I thought, oh, maybe I can incorporate something like that into the shirt. And so I ended up creating like an asymmetric side on the left, and to make it a little bit more like, I guess, zombie-esque or vampire-esque, or like a bit like worn. It has just a few layers of the shirt. You will see what I mean when it starts to become a bit more clear. And I didn't want to go with the typical like skirt or pants, so I gave it a shorts. I don't know if that was successful or not, but I just wanted to add something slightly different, and it's also like a bit asymmetric. I am personally often inspired just by random movies that I've watched, fantastical stuff. And I recently watched, I think, Hocus Pocus 2 came out, right? That was fun. I'm looking forward to the Wednesday Addams, or I should say the Addams Family show that's coming up on Netflix, I think. And I'm super excited that Halloween is coming out, though I'm too scared to watch it. Anyway, what movies are you gonna watch? Let me know in the comments. second step that I apply to my illustrations is usually just retracing the same lines that I created, and there is an optional part that's coming up in a moment where I added some thinner lines, so like with I think this one is a 0.3 fine liner, and I chose one that was 0. I don't remember, still a smaller one, and to create like shadows. And that was more me experimenting with something I had read in one of my drawing books that I used to, brush up on my skills. Yeah, you can do it if you want, but it's completely optional. You can also add the shadow with the markers. When you're drawing, usually it's all about the illusion that you create with the lines and the colors. I personally think, unless you're doing realistic artwork, it doesn't have to be exactly as it is in real life, especially when we're talking about fantasy. It's all about fantastic, whatever your fantasy can come up with, or whatever you can mix up into a fantastical item. I find that sometimes we can get bugged up by the end result that we don't even start, because we're like, oh, my skills aren't there yet, or these other artists are so much better than me. But we forget that there's also a whole aspect of just having fun and just trying to express something, and that if you don't start putting, pencil to paper or whatever your medium is, you're not going to get any better either. So just start and have a bit of fun, do a bit of doodling, a bit of sketching, and try out different techniques. I think that's also a key thing. We might think we like a specific type of style, but maybe a different one is more suitable to you, and then it completely unleashes the way you create art, and it's a lot easier, a lot more fun. That doesn't mean that you're not, like, it's okay to challenge yourself and to do and work with techniques that are not as natural to you, but it's okay to also navigate towards the things that you enjoy and have fun with. What you see me do here is I'm selecting the colors. I usually use very bright and happy colors, but because this is a different type of creature and I wanted it to be just a little bit less of that happy vibe, I changed some of the colors. I went with green tones and a purple. I have mentioned this as well in my previous video. I feel like those are usually the colors when you think about villains, especially like in Disney, they would use those colors a lot. Think about Ursula from Ariel, think about Maleficent, think about, let me think what else. Even like, it's not necessarily that the character is those colors, but when there's shadows casted, the undertones are usually those greens and purples. Another thing that inspired me here in terms of color was I wanted something that was magical. So what I also had in my mind was like different types of Marvel movies. I thought about Gamora in the Guardians of the Galaxy, and I thought, okay, it would be actually cool if she had the whole skin in a different color, but I didn't want to go with green to replicate it exactly as she has it. And I also have another character. She's called Rise. She's an aquatic fairy, so I didn't want to go with blue as well. So just think a little bit about your colors, of like what is it that you're trying to achieve, what's maybe the change you want to apply, and and then once I had selected essentially my purples and my greens, I was looking for tones that were maybe not as like happy, like if you see that's like a bit of a darkish green that I've used. I didn't want to go with full black. That's a very limiting color, because once it's black, it's black. You can't make it darker or lighter really. So I selected 3 gray tones or 4 gray tones to see how I can play with that and create depth through shadows and light, or through like darker colors and lighter colors, which you can see me specifically here on the cape working with. So I added this dark blue. It's like a gray blue, and that's like the undertone. So that means that my cape, even if I'm using gray tones, is going to have a cool undertone. And that was important for me as well when selecting the colors. The purples and that blue undertone, these are cool colors, versus the greens and the browns that I'm using as a contrast. They're warm tones. And so that's another thing to keep in mind always, to mix your warm and cool tones to have a more balanced outcome. Now, you don't have, like, these are the types of rules that you can of course break, but it's kind of good to understand that they exist, so that you know when you're adjusting them, maybe what you need to like balance in a different way. The way I like to color with markers is by using usually minimum 3 colors. And if I don't have 3 colors that are sort of adjacent to each other, I can also use 2. But the idea is that you have a middle tone, a dark tone, which would be your shadow, and then a lighter tone, which will represent your highlights. I like to usually start with the lightest color, because you can't lighten up. It's not as easy to lighten up an already very dark color. So I usually select then my lightest color, and I start adding shadows, so with the darkest color, and then I might take the mid-tone to soften the contrast between those two, so that it doesn't creating like a gradient, so that it's not like, here is a light green and here is the other dark green, and then there's nothing in between. So that's the idea. And if I'm only using 2 colors at a time, I would then use the lightest color and pass another layer on the area that I want to darken a little bit more. So it as well, it softens that contrast between the colors. Before we jump onto the Halloweeny reveal, I just wanted to say thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. I hope you created your own creature. And make sure if you did, that you give me a thumbs up, you subscribe, and check out my upcoming Christmas videos. I hope to see you there.
Happy Halloween.